A poor preacher was very mad when he confronted his wife with a receipt for a dress that cost $150. He said, "How could you do this?" She says, "I don't know. I was standing in the store looking at the dress. Then I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, I found myself trying it on. It was like the devil was whispering to me, 'You look great in that dress. You should buy it.'" Her husband said, "You know what to do when the devil tempts you like that. You should say, 'Get thee behind me, Satan.'" Then his wife responded, "But honey, I did. But then the devil said the dress looked good from the back too." Have you ever been tempted? Well, yes. If we're human, we have been tempted. Tempted to sin. In Genesis chapter 39, we read about a man who ran from sin. The man, of course, was Joseph. Read with me, Genesis chapter 39. We'll be reading verses 1 through 20. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story: "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. We first, in our text, see the realization of temptation. Verse 7. Now, Joseph, as we recall from reading Genesis earlier, had been sold into slavery by his brothers. They didn't like him. They were jealous of him. They wanted to get rid of him. At first they were going to kill him, but then they saw the opportunity. Well, let's just sell him. And we'll just tell Dad that he got killed by wild animals. So Joseph ends up in Egypt, and he ends up a slave. He's bought by Potiphar, but God is with him. God blesses him. And everything in Potiphar's house is blessed because Joseph is there. Joseph is in charge, and this was the way of slavery in ancient days. A slave could be elevated in the household, have a lot of responsibility. He was the property of someone, but he could have a very important role. Joseph had that role. Well, Potiphar's wife saw Joseph, and notice we're told he was well built and handsome. Paul J. Kissling said, "The Bible rarely gives detailed physical descriptions of its human characters. When it does, it almost always has a significant role in the plot." Joseph was a good-looking man. Potiphar's wife noticed. She not only noticed, but she was attracted to Joseph and made advances to him over and over and over. Temptation is a reality. Have you heard of the reality TV show from the Fox network called Temptation Island? Temptation Island is a series in which 4 unmarried couples travel to the Caribbean to test and explore the strength of their relationship. Once on the island, the couples are introduced to eligible singles and then separated from their partners until the final day of their stay. The object for the couples is to see if they love each other enough to overcome temptation. The object for the singles is to see if they can tempt the couples to be unfaithful. The object for Fox TV is to make a lot of money off people who watch trash on television. Well, it apparently worked. 16 million people tuned in to watch the debut of the show. Temptation is a reality. It's even been made into a TV show. And we confront temptation on a regular basis. A man and his wife were once in a shopping mall when a young, attractive woman in a short dress walked by. The husband tried not to look, but he took a quick glance. His wife, without looking up from the outfit she was examining, said, "Was that worth the trouble you were in?" He didn't get away with anything with his wife. And she argued, was that worth it? Well, in Joseph's case, we see that he refused temptation. He refused it over and over again. Potiphar's wife was persistent over and over again. She made advances toward him. And we are faced with temptation quite often. How are we going to handle it? Didn't know I was going to have to repeat sneeze this evening. It is said that about 1/3 of teens in the church will have sexual intercourse by the age of 18. And another 1/3 will take it right to the edge. Notice this is young people in the church, religious young people. A survey in Christianity Today found that 1/4 of its subscribers admitted to having an extramarital affair. Basically, that meant that 1 in 4 Christians had committed adultery. One survey found that 12% of Protestant ministers admitted to having sexual intercourse outside of marriage. And there is a pornography epidemic that is destroying the souls of millions of people. How do you handle temptation? It's all around. Television, in its early days, was called the vast wasteland. Now, television can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. It depends on what's on it. It was the case before television with movies. And I guess even the radio dramas of the old days, they could have a little bit of material there that was inappropriate, although the censors were pretty strict back then. But at any rate, temptation surrounds. And with the internet, there's a whole new world of temptation concerning sexual immorality. How do you handle temptation? Well, the simple answer is to say no. Remember Nancy Reagan, who popularized the slogan, "Just say no"? Well, that's simple and straightforward, but that little 2-letter word can be a very difficult choice to make. Martin Luther King Jr. says, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And King himself faced temptation and did not always resist it. There was an enthusiastic but somewhat unscrupulous salesman who was waiting to see the purchasing agent of an engineering firm. The salesman was there to submit his company's bid for a particular job. He couldn't help but notice, however, that a competitor's bid was on the purchasing agent's desk. Unfortunately, the actual figure was covered by a can of juice. The temptation to see the amount quoted became too much, so the salesman lifted the can. His heart sank as he saw thousands of BBs pour from the bottomless can and scatter across the floor. There was somebody smarter than human. He gave in to temptation and no doubt paid the cost. Former Congressman J.C. Watt said, "Character is doing the right thing when nobody's looking. There are too many people who think that the only thing that's right is to get by, and the only thing that's wrong is to get caught." An old preacher was asked by a young man, "When will I cease to be tempted by the sins of the flesh?" And the wise old man said, "Son, I wouldn't trust myself until I'd been dead 3 days." Temptation, maybe not that persistent, but it's very persistent. We always need to watch out for temptation. Well, Joseph did. Potiphar's wife is persistent. And she catches him in a bad situation. There weren't any other servants in the house. Now, the Bible does not say, but you just wonder, was that arranged by Potiphar's wife? At any rate, Joseph is there. He is doing his job. He's alone with Potiphar's wife, and she sees her opportunity. She once again says, "Come to bed with me," and she grabs hold of his cloak. Now, he ran from sin. He left the cloak in her hand. And one commentator said, well, would it have been better if he had fought her? If the cloak had torn, she would have had to explain how the cloak got torn. But Scripture doesn't comment on that. That's not what Joseph did. He got out of there. He wanted to get away from her advances. He ran from temptation. There is the famous scene in the movie Forrest Gump where some kids are throwing rocks at Forrest. At first, he doesn't know what to do. And then Jenny says, "Run, Forrest, run." Well, that's very good advice when it comes to temptation. When the enemy is throwing things at us, when it's more than we can bear, we need to turn around and run the other way. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18 says, "Flee from sexual immorality." 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22 says, "Flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call upon the Lord out of a pure heart." One day, Linus and Charlie Brown were walking along and chatting with one another. Linus says, "I don't like to face problems head on. I think the best way to solve problems is to avoid them. In fact, this is a distinct philosophy of mine. No problem is so big or so complicated that it can't be run away from." The good thing when faced with temptation to sin is to go the other direction as quickly as possible. Sometimes when we're tempted, we may slowly try to get away from it and it catches us. Or we're like the boy who was told by his mother, "Do not go swimming." A little while later, he was leaving the house. And he wasn't doing a very good job of being inconspicuous because the swimsuit was sticking out of his back pocket. She says, "I told you not to go swimming." He says, "Oh, well, I just had it in case I got tempted." I don't think she would have bought into that, do you? It has been said, when you flee temptation, do not leave a forwarding address. Get away from it. Don't let it know where you've gone. Well, what were the results of the temptation in Joseph's case? This woman who wanted him so bad, when she was left there, scorned, and had his cloak in her hand, very quickly changed matters. She called those household servants in. Now they show up. And she says, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. She turns the tables. And of course, she holds onto the cloak. Her husband comes home. She tells him the story. That Hebrew you brought us came to me to make sport of me. Again, she says, but I screamed for help. The servants, or he ran and left his cloak behind. She turns the tables. She was a woman scorned, and she was going to get even with Joseph. Now, we read that Potiphar became angry. He became angry, it says, and he put Joseph in prison. The great English dramatist William Congreve once wrote that heaven has no rage like love to hatred turn, nor hell of fury like a woman scorned. That fit Potiphar's wife just right. And it says Potiphar was angry. Well, who was he angry with? First guess, he was angry with Joseph. He had him put in prison. But do you think that he knew something about his wife? Could there have been some anger toward her? Maybe it was a combination. He was angry with both. He had Joseph put in prison. Now it is said that in those days, prisons weren't really a place where you were put to serve out a sentence. It was a place where you were put to either await execution or exoneration. But Joseph is put in prison. Could it be that Potiphar wanted some time to get the facts of the situation? Whatever the case, this was all in the plan of God. Joseph was there in prison, and the Lord was with him. It wasn't too long until he was in charge of the prison. Sounds bad to be put in prison. But Joseph's refusal to give in to temptation showed his faithfulness to God. And God would move him from prison to power. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a book entitled Temptation. It was a series of devotionals, I believe he gave, and they survived his execution during the war and were gathered into a book. But here's a quote from that book. In our members there is a slumbering inclination towards desire, which is both sudden and fierce. With irresistible power, desire seizes mastery over the flesh. All at once a secret smoldering fire is kindled. The flesh burns and is in flames. It makes no difference whether it is sexual desire or ambitions or vanity or desire for revenge or love of fame and power or greed for money. At this moment, God is quite unreal to us. He loses all reality. Satan does not here fill us with hatred for God, but with forgetfulness of God. The lust thus routs, envelops the mind, and the will of man in the deepest distresses. The power of clear discrimination and decision are taken from us. It is here everything within me rises up against the Word of God. Bonhoeffer was on target, wasn't he? When temptation comes, if we're not careful, it basically causes us for the moment to forget God. We know better, but the temptation overtakes us. Well, someone put it well. Wrong is always wrong, despite our efforts to excuse our actions. Wrong is wrong, even if you don't get caught. Wrong is wrong, even if you think you are doing it for a good cause. Wrong is wrong, even if others are doing worse things. Wrong is wrong, even if it doesn't bother the conscience. Wrong is wrong, even if others consider it acceptable. Remember, there is never a right way to do wrong. I was in elementary school, I believe. Jerry Hill was a preacher in Tennessee. His wife was from a little community in southeastern Oklahoma, not too far from where we lived. And he would come out on a regular basis in the summer to hold a vacation Bible school in the day, a gospel meeting at night. And a lot of us from Idabel would go down for vacation Bible school in the day, and then we'd go back for the gospel meeting at night. And there was a sermon. Now, this is years ago. I was younger than Dietrich, I believe. And Jerry Hill preached about the boy who ran from sin, Joseph. And I believe, if memory serves, he told this story. They were looking for a bus driver. He had to pass a test. They said to the candidates, you drive this bus on this mountain road and you see just how close you can get to the edge of the road without going off the cliff. The first candidate, he came and he drove and he was really close. The second one took out and he got even closer. The third one got just as far away from the edge of the cliff as he could. Who do you think got the job? He was avoiding temptation, running from it, running from the danger. And as Christians, we need to run from temptation.